You ever get that, little shiver down your spine when you hit that login button online and the little voice whispers, maybe this isn't such a good idea?
No, yeah,
Or maybe you saw another headline about, another huge data breach and you just kind of went, eeh, not again.
definitely.
If any of that sounds familiar, well, then you are definitely in the right place. Welcome to Calm Coding, the show where we take a deep dive every week into the world of cybersecurity.
And this week, we are absolutely diving headfirst into all this recent cybersecurity news. We've got, well, a pretty interesting mix here. A little concerning at times, too. We've got governments who want to get into encrypted data, the never-ending threat of ransomware, and, oh yeah, some really clever ways those cyber criminals are up in their game.
Yeah, no kidding. We've been going through all the tech news from, let's see, this past week. Specifically, Tech Radar's been our go-to, trying to bring you all the biggest things happening out there. And our goal for this deep dive, well, it's to, I guess, cut through all the crazy jargon and hype you see everywhere and try to give you a clear picture
Huh.
of, okay, what does this stuff actually mean for you?
Yeah.
Like getting bogged down in all the super technical nitty-gritty details.
Exactly.
So where should we even begin with all this?
Well, there's a pretty big story right now about Apple and a kind of request from the UK government. Basically, Apple's fighting back against this demand to put a backdoor into their encryption.
Oh, yeah, I saw that.
And what's even more kind of strange is this whole appeal thing might be happening in secret, behind closed doors.
Right, and I mean, Apple has been very clear about where they stand on this. They've flat out said, we will never build a backdoor. And they actually went and removed their advanced data protection. That's their fancy name for end-to-end encryption from many devices they sell in the UK. That's a pretty strong move, don't you think?
Yeah, definitely. It really shows you, I guess, that fundamental clash we're seeing between governments wanting access to everything, for national security and all that, versus the idea of strong encryption, which is, supposed to protect everyone's data.
Right.
And it's interesting, TechRadar actually did this poll with their readers, asking if they think governments should be able to get into private encrypted data.
So what do people say?
Well, a huge majority, like 67%, sided with Apple. They said, nope, their data's private and the government shouldn't have any access. Only about 8% were cool with it, saying they had, quote, nothing to hide, end quote. And then about a quarter of them thought that, yeah, maybe in some extreme cases, under very specific circumstances, then maybe access could be granted. But it seems most people are really leaning towards that privacy side of things.
Yeah, it makes sense. It kind of reflects that whole, I guess, general feeling about privacy these days.
Right. And it's not just everyday users who are worried about this. Even the U.S. Director of National Intelligence spoke up about it. They called the UK's request, I'm just going to quote this here, a clear and egregious violation of Americans' privacy and civil liberties.
Wow.
And they even brought up how this kind of reach, going beyond borders like that, could actually create weaknesses that, well, bad guys could then exploit.
Yeah, it's that whole slippery slope argument, isn't it, when it comes to encryption? Matt Aldridge, he's from OpenText Cybersecurity, and he said it perfectly. Either a system has trust no one, end-to-end encryption, or it doesn't. There are no halfway houses here.
Right.
He was basically saying that what Apple did with taking away that ADP thing for UK users was actually necessary. So they wouldn't end up weakening encryption for, get this, over 1 billion users all over the world.
Yeah.
That really puts things in perspective.
Absolutely, it does, because once you have a backdoor, well, that's a potential weakness for anyone to take advantage of, not just the good guys with a warrant. If we think about the bigger picture here, it kind of raises a pretty important question for you. Like, how does this whole situation affect what you expect from digital privacy and the security of all your devices and your data, no matter where you live?
Good point.
If one country can make this kind of demand, what's stopping others from doing the same, especially now in our crazy interconnected world?
That's something to think about. Okay, so let's shift gears a bit now. Let's talk about another thing that always seems to be making headlines. Stolen logins and those dreaded data breaches.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it seems like things are, well, they're not going in the right direction, though.
Not good.
A new report from Flashpoint, it revealed some pretty worrying numbers for, let's see, for 2024. Over 3.2 billion logins compromised. That's a big jump, like a 33% increase from the year before.
Wait, over 3 billion? How are that many logins even getting stolen in the first place?
Well, the Flashpoint report says a whopping 75% of those stolen logins came from something called information stealing malware, or info stealers for short. It's basically sneaky software that grabs your usernames, passwords, and any other sensitive data it can find. And this stuff infected, get this, over 23 million devices worldwide. The biggest culprit seems to be this redline malware.
Okay.
That alone got into almost 10 million systems.
10 million? That's insane.
Yeah. And sadly, it doesn't stop there. We're also seeing this, well, surge is the word, I guess, in ransomware attacks, too.
Ugh, ransomware. Never
No.
goes away.
Nope. They went up by 10% in 2024. And that's after get this, a massive 84% jump the year before. It really shows you how persistent and how much this threat's growing, you know? And
Yeah.
what's kind of crazy is how resilient these cyber criminals are. Even when law enforcement shuts down some groups, disrupts their stuff, new ones just pop up like whack-a-mole.
Right.
With even newer, crazier malware, it's like this constant back and forth.
It's like a never-ending game of cat and mouse.
Yeah.
But it feels like the mice are getting faster and smarter all the time.
Exactly. And because of all this activity, we're seeing tons of data breaches. Flashpoint tracked 6,670 of them that were made public in 2024. And all those breaches led to more than 16.8 billion records being exposed. Think about that. Billions of pieces of personal information potentially in the wrong hands.
That's a scary thought. Billions.
Yeah. There's this Ian Gray, he's the VP of Intelligence at Flashpoint. He had this interesting quote. He said, "We live in interesting times where technology is both a blessing and a curse." And he pointed out the challenges we're going to face in the future, especially with, well, artificial intelligence being used to make attacks even more powerful and automated. Yeah. He's right about the AI part. We're already starting to see how AI can make it easier for people to commit cybercrimes, even if they're not, master hackers or anything. We'll talk more about that later. But for now, thinking about all those stolen logins and exposed records, it brings up a pretty important question for you, right? It's not just about having strong passwords anymore. How can you really protect your whole digital identity when so much data is already out there?
Good question.
And what does it mean for the security of your personal data in the long run, when so much of it has already been compromised?
That's something to think about for sure. Okay, well, speaking of data breaches, there was a pretty big one that hit the Pennsylvania State Education Association, the PSEA. And this one potentially affected over 500,000 people.
Yeah, this was a ransomware attack. It happened way back in July 2024, but they didn't actually notify the people affected, over 517,000 of them, until February of this year. That kind of delay, it's really concerning.
Right.
It can actually cause more harm to those whose data was stolen.
And what's even worse, the data they stole is exactly the stuff you'd be most worried about. Personal details, financial info, even health records. We're talking names, driver's license numbers, social security numbers, payment card info, medical histories, the whole shebang. It's like a cybercriminal's dream come true.
Yeah. It really goes to show that even places you wouldn't think of as being targets for these fancy cyber attacks, they're still vulnerable. The group behind this, they call themselves Reseda. They reportedly wanted a hefty ransom, like 20 Bitcoin, which was over $1 million back then. We don't know if they got paid or not, but their claim, it's been taken down from their dark web leak site. This whole thing just emphasizes, I guess, that no one's really immune to this stuff, so it makes you think, what steps are you taking to protect your most sensitive info, even when you give it to organizations that seem totally trustworthy?
Yeah, you really can't be too careful. Okay, so sticking with ransomware, that Lockbit group, well, they're still a big problem, even with all the efforts to shut them down. And now they've got their sights set on Fortinet firewalls.
Yeah, that's right. They've been going after a couple of specific weaknesses. They're labeled as, let me check my notes, CVE 2024-55591 and CVE 2025-24472. But here's the thing. Those vulnerabilities were patched back in January 2025.
So they're going after old stuff.
Yeah, which really highlights why it's so important to keep your systems updated. Always install those security patches as soon as they come out.
I'll try to remember that.
Good. And it looks like they're using a new type of ransomware in these attacks. They're calling it, get this, super black. The researchers think it's connected to the well-known Lockbit 3.0.
Super black. Sounds ominous.
Right. The guys at Forescout, they're the ones who found all this. They're saying the culprit is this threat actor they're calling Mora001, and they've noticed that this Mora001, they've got very similar tactics and procedures as Lockbit, how they do things. So they're pretty sure it's an affiliate. And even the ransom note itself, it uses the same contact info. So far, they've got at least 3 confirmed victims, but the real number, probably much higher.
Probably, yeah. It's this constant back and forth with Lockbit, isn't it? The FBI hit them pretty hard in February 2024. They seized their servers and got their decryption keys, but they've managed to come back.
Yeah, they did. It just goes to show how tough these ransomware operations are. They get disrupted, and they just bounce back and keep attacking. For anyone out there who manages networks or uses those Fortinet products, this is a big wake-up call. Patching your systems quickly, it's absolutely critical. Makes you think, what does this whole battle with ransomware tell us about how we need to be more careful and proactive with our security,
It's a good point.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to some news about the business side of cybersecurity. Google, they're reportedly buying this cloud security platform called Wiz.
Yeah.
And get this, for a whopping $32 billion.
That's a huge deal. It could really change the whole cloud security landscape. Google's saying this move is all about making their Google Cloud offerings stronger, both in regular cloud security and, well, those multi-cloud environments, which are becoming more and more common. The goal here, they want to give better security and maybe even make things more affordable for their customers so they can compete better with the big guys, like Amazon and Microsoft.
Makes sense. And this isn't the first time Google's tried to buy Wiz, right?
Yeah.
I remember hearing about a $23 billion offer back in 2024.
Yeah.
That one didn't go through.
Right.
So what's different this time around?
Well, it could be a few things. The article mentioned maybe there's more optimism about getting approval from regulators. President Trump's been talking about making things easier for big tech acquisitions, so that might be playing a role. Or maybe some of the issues they had before, like how much freedom Wiz would have to operate on their own. Well, maybe they figured that stuff out.
Yeah, could be.
We even have some quotes from the big guys themselves. Thomas Kurian, he's the CEO of Google Cloud, he said, and I'm quoting here, "Joint vision to make cybersecurity more accessible and simpler to use." And Asaf Rappaport, the CEO of Wiz, he talked about how they're still committed to helping customers across all the major cloud platforms.
Sounds like they're on the same page.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea, right? Making cybersecurity easier and more accessible to everyone. This acquisition, it could lead to some really cool new tools for businesses that rely on the cloud, especially, tools that are more integrated and user-friendly.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
So for anyone listening who works with cloud infrastructure, it's worth thinking about. How might this change the security solutions you have available? And how might it affect the overall security of your cloud setup in the future?
Yeah, lots of possibilities. Okay, let's get back to those threats that are more, immediate. We're hearing that Microsoft 365 accounts are under attack. And they're using this, pretty sneaky method involving malicious OAuth apps.
Yeah. This one's tricky. It's worrying, too. Cyber criminals, they're using hacked Office 365 accounts to spread these bad oath apps. And the apps, they often disguise themselves as legit business software, like Adobe or DocuSign, stuff everyone uses.
So, you get an email, maybe even from a coworker, whose account's been compromised, telling you to install one of these apps.
Exactly. It's all about fooling people into giving these bad apps permission to access their stuff, like their profile info, their email, even their OpenID data. And at first glance, those permissions might not seem like a big deal.
Right.
But the attackers, they can use that info to create really convincing personalized phishing campaigns.
So they're getting your info to then trick you even further.
Yep. And once they've got those permissions, well, the next step is they redirect their victims to these fake websites. They're designed to steal login info and sometimes even install more malware on your system. The folks at Proofpoint, they're the ones who uncovered this campaign. And they noticed this thing called a click-fix social engineering attack being used. Basically, they trick you with these pop-ups in your browser, making you think you need to download a browser update. But surprise, it's actually malware. This whole thing, it's been targeting a ton of different organizations across all kinds of industries in the US and Europe.
It just goes to show you really got to be super careful about giving apps permission to access your stuff, even if it looks like it's coming from a source you trust. For everyone listening, it's worth asking yourself, what steps do you take to really make sure these requests are legit, before you hit that allow button. It's a crucial thing to think about these days.
Absolutely. Now, here's something kind of strange, even a bit unsettling. Researchers, they've found this way to trick AI chatbots.
Oh, AI chatbots.
Yep. They're basically making them bypass their own security measures.
Yeah.
And get this, they're even making the chatbots create malware.
Hold on.
All by using, well, they call them weaponized bedtime stories.
Weaponized bedtime stories. That sounds like something out of, I don't know, a sci-fi movie or something.
I know, right? The researchers, they're from Cato CTRL. They've come up with this technique they're calling immersive world.
Immersive world.
Yeah. It uses something called narrative engineering to get around the security controls built into those large language models. They basically create these super elaborate fictional scenarios. And the scenarios, well, they subtly make it seem okay to do stuff that's normally restricted. So they basically trick the AI into doing things it's not supposed to do.
That's wild. So could they, like, actually get the AI to do bad stuff?
Yeah, unbelievably they did. They were able to get ChatGPT 4.0, DeepSeek R1, and V3, and even Microsoft Copilot to create a fully functional piece of malware, a Chrome info stealer. And get this, the researchers themselves, they didn't know how to code malware before this. It's crazy.
So now anyone can create malware, even if they don't know how to code.
It's a scary thought, isn't it? Vitaly Simonovich, he's from Cato Networks, he said, "We believe the rise of the zero-knowledge threat actor poses high risk to organizations because the barrier to creating malware is now substantially lowered with Gen AI tools." Basically, this immersive world technique shows that even someone without technical skills, they could potentially use AI to create some seriously dangerous software. And it really makes you think about how fast AI is changing the whole threat landscape. What other vulnerabilities might pop up as these AI models get even smarter and easier to get a hold of?
It's a pretty scary thought.
Definitely. Okay, moving on. Let's talk about email. Still one of the biggest ways cyber attacks happen. It's insane how much unwanted and malicious email businesses get every single day.
It's like a never-ending flood.
Right. A recent report from Hornet Security, they had some crazy stats. In 2024, businesses received over 20.5 billion emails.
Billion.
Yeah. And almost 37% of those were unwanted. And then over 2%, like 427.8 million emails, were actually malicious.
Wow. So companies are dealing with a ton of junk and actual threats every day.
Yep. And phishing. Still a huge problem. It made up a third of all cyber attacks. But what's even more alarming is this thing called reverse proxy credential theft. It's becoming really common. Basically, they use these fake login pages that look exactly like the real deal.
So how does that work?
When you enter your login info, even your one-time code from your Authenticator app, the attackers grab it all. And just like that, they're in your account. What's really scary is that this method can sometimes get around that two-factor authentication that so many people rely on.
Wow, bypassing two-factor, that's a problem.
Yeah. Tools like EvilJinx, they let attackers create these super convincing fake login pages.
So even if you're careful, you could still get tricked.
It's tough. And because of this, malicious links in emails, they're a big problem. They're making up a bigger and bigger part of all cyber attacks.
Sounds like we really can't let our guard down at all.
Nope. Daniel Hoffman, the CEO of Hornet Security, he talked about how things are shifting towards these really clever social engineering attacks and how important it is to have that zero trust mindset. He also said that even though some attack methods stay the same, the sheer number of malicious emails out there means we always have to be on our toes.
Right.
Brand impersonation, it's still a huge thing too. Big shipping companies like DHL and FedEx, they're the ones getting impersonated the most in these scams.
Yeah, I see those all the time.
Yeah, so it really comes down to the person opening those emails. Having good email security practices is crucial. And you got to know about the latest phishing tricks, especially the ones trying to get around two-factor authentication. It's worth asking yourself, are you really checking every link before you click it?
Yeah.
Are you suspicious of any login page that looks even a little bit off? Developing those habits, it can really lower your risk.
That's good advice.
Yeah.
Okay, lastly, we've got this interesting situation with Elon Musk and some statements he made about a cyber attack on X, what used to be Twitter.
Oh, yeah, this one got some attention.
After X had those service disruptions back on March 10th, Elon Musk came out and said they were hit by a, quote, massive cyber attack. And he claimed the IP addresses where the attack came from were traced back to the Ukraine area. This sparked quite a debate in the cybersecurity world. So what do the experts think about all this?
Most cybersecurity experts, they think those outages were probably caused by a distributed denial of service attack, a DDoS attack, where they flood the servers with so much traffic that the service goes down for legit users. And while a DDoS attack can definitely cause some major disruption, it's not exactly known for being, well, super technically complex.
Okay, so what about what Musk said about where the attack came from?
Well, that's where the experts really disagreed with him. They say that in DDoS attacks, they usually use hacked devices from all over the world. So it's almost impossible to say for sure which country it started in. Even if some traffic did come from Ukrainian IP addresses, it doesn't mean the attackers were actually in Ukraine. One expert put it really well. They said that kind of information tells you absolutely nothing about where the attack really came from.
So basically, blaming Ukraine just based on IP addresses, well, it wasn't very accurate.
Yeah, it was a big oversimplification. Wired magazine even quoted this anonymous researcher who said that none of the top 20 sources of traffic in the attack were from Ukraine, directly contradicting Musk's statement. And then some cybersecurity analysts, they even suggested that maybe X had some security weaknesses on their own servers, which could have made the outage even worse. This whole thing, it really shows how risky it is to make quick judgments about who's behind a cyber attack. And it reminds us that the truth is usually much more complicated than it seems at first. It makes you think, what does this tell us about how hard it is to understand and report on these online security incidents accurately, especially when you've got these big public figures making these strong statements?
Yeah, that's a good point. So as we wrap up this week's deep dive into the latest cybersecurity news, we've seen some pretty big themes emerge. Ransomware and data breaches, they're still major threats. They're just getting more and more sophisticated.
Yeah.
And the whole debate about encryption and government access, well, it's a battle between security and privacy.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got cyber criminals constantly changing their tactics, even using AI now. It's changing the whole threat landscape.
Absolutely. Our goal was to give you a clear overview of all this. Hopefully you've got a better grasp of what's going on out there.
Exactly. And with that, here's a final thought for you to ponder. With cyber attacks getting so much more complex, and with all this personal and sensitive data being stolen, and with the lines getting blurrier between state-sponsored attacks and just regular cybercrime, what big changes do we need to make, both individually and as a society?
Yeah.
To really stay ahead of the game and protect ourselves in the years to come, it's something to really think about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
See you next week.